All
Oh,
right. No, but
no
you
music.
can do
Dang.
it. But hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Military Finance 2.0 from US Vet Wealth. I'm the founder of US Vet Wealth, Scott Tucker, and the author of Veteran Wealth Secrets. And with us, as always, is my trusted expert in all things finance and the host of the Get to Vet podcast community, where they talk about all things military transition, more so than just the finance and stuff. So if you're listening to this show, you should definitely be checking out Get to Vet as well. They've had some awesome guests on, including myself. And we'll probably be talking about sponsoring that podcast as well with the Blue Book, considering
Yeah.
pretty much everybody going through transition needs to talk about that. And pretty excited actually to talk about Jen. My wife hosted is all about podcasting, hosted Holding Down the Fort podcast for military families. What's up, Jared? Um,
Hey,
she's
Jared.
she's putting together a book, a version of our Blue Book, directly for military spouses. So that's a pretty exciting thing we're working on, and we'd like to send out a copy of the book for free to some military spouses to have them read it. We don't want critiques on our solutions. What we want to do is help translate what we were how we talk about things like survivor benefit plan and all that stuff that's important for them, but we know it's jargon, it's military jargon, and it's really hard to get that into a space where it can be consumed. That was the word I was looking for. Consumed easier and more effectively versus all this military jargon stuff. So really excited about that. So if your military spouse would like to read through the book, give us some feedback so we can do that. Please reach out to us and let us know. You can reach out to Jen at US Vet Wealth directly, or of course hit us all up on LinkedIn. But how's your week going, man? You're muted. See, we're good at this podcasting thing.
See, it's funny because if you listen to the Get to Vet podcast, we had a day where I think we recorded 3 episodes in the same day, and every one of them I screwed my name up. So we got on the call, and I was like, "Hey, I want to make sure I get your name right and everything right." And I'm like, "It's like this, okay?" And we got on the same page, and then we get on there, and I'm like, "Hey there, Get to Vet. This is Trevor Waxwell." And son of a bitch, I screwed my name up again. And so now Mike and I are keeping track of how many times I get it right in a row. I think I'm back to 3 times in a row I've got my name right. So
How do you get your name wrong?
I just get pumped, dude. Like I get excited to get on there and do that, and I just rush it.
Is there an opposite of dyslexic? Dyslexic, you're reading backwards this way, but you just switched an M to a W.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Maybe it's called dyslexic. I don't, whatever. But my week was good so far. Monday was super busy. Yesterday was busy too. I think I only had a couple of calls, so I was able to catch up on all that little stuff in between which I could tell you, from a productivity standpoint, make sure you take care of the little things in life, because if you don't, they pile up, and you just get into that state of, I have so many things to do, I'm paralyzed. Because that happened to me last week. I had so many things to do. So over the weekend, I didn't have anything to do. I was like, I'm going to plan this stuff out. Here's how I'm going to tackle all this stuff. And, this week has been a lot better. I haven't felt like I've been overwhelmed. But I know you and I were talking. The subject of today, we were exchanging some articles back and forth on today's topic, the inflation problem.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it's especially relevant right now, this last year. I mean, we'll just start it right with this and hope everybody gets this fact. You need to have a little bit of background in economics, but not that much. But it's about supply and demand in the value of something. And the most important thing that we need to understand what the value is the actual dollar itself and how we use it for purchasing power. And so, excuse me, when there's more, geez, when there's more in circulation, I get jazzed up about this stuff. When there's more in circulation, then it allows people to buy more goods, so there's less supply, and that creates the prices to go up. And when there's, it's not even about demand; it's just because there's so much money out there. It's like you mentioned a few times, all the TVs at Walmart. When people have money, they spend it, and when money's getting spent and it's circulating in the system, that can exasperate all this. It's called the movement of money, and so we're not. I mean, we might touch on this stuff a little bit more, but I implore everybody to look into this in more detail, because here's the main fact: 40% of all dollars ever created were created last year as a response to the bailouts and stuff like that and these stimulus packages. And still, they're proposing another $6 trillion of stimulus budget, whatever you want to call it. And so at some point, we got to ask inflation is going to hit us one way or the other. It has already happened, as Jared's texted. I'll put his thing up right here. And so I mean, Jared's a supply chain guy. So Jared, we definitely need to have you on to talk about how the supply chain comes into the finances and stuff like that, because you hear about all these ships off of the coast of Long Beach, like 300 ships are just stuck there. And so this all plays into it. And at some point, the risk is, do we have is our dollar going to be able to buy it? And if you haven't heard about the Weimar Republic in Germany, or what's happened just in Venezuela in the last 2 decades, don't think that this can't happen here. I'm not trying to be Chicken Little, because quite frankly, if hyperinflation occurs, the only way to protect yourself from it really is being valuable as an individual. In whatever the value of something is, you'll still be in more demand. When you're getting those dollars and wheeling wheelbarrows around like they did in Germany in the 20s to buy loaves of bread. So, that's stuff we need to be aware of and why it's important. But inflation happens every day anyways in what we talk about in military life. That's why they have the cost of living adjustment. And so we just want to, rather than it just be like, oh, I get a COLA because there's inflation. It's like, why is there inflation? So we want to get into that a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I think really what prompted this discussion too was we had talked about something that we see a lot, right? There's all these websites, all these financial institutions, coaching websites, all those. They, they make these calculators to say, hey, how financially fit are you? How prepared are you going to be to retire at whatever? So they create these little calculators, which are super simple, and it's not really designed as a tool to help you plan. They don't care about you being able to plan by yourself. These things are created as an enticement to get you to use the services or products of whatever company's offering that stuff. Mm-hmm. And the thing is they don't put a whole lot of effort into creating these. There's not a lot of features involved with those because they don't care. They don't want you to be able to operate independently without them. It's kind of like we're like the antithesis of some of those other companies, because our whole thing is like, hey, you don't really need me. Like that stuff that all those other companies doing is garbage. Like the reality is, as I can be here as a guide to you and kind of help you as kind of like a macro advisor, but the reality is, how much do you really need me, right? So we have those tools that do I think a more in-depth analysis of that stuff. That's really what those are. They're marketing gimmicks. It's designed to say, oh, looks like you may not be prepared for retirement. Call one of our advisors today. And
well, I mean, the way I look at it, sorry to interrupt, the way I look at it is, there was a time when, yes, it might have been nice to have an advisor. Oh, can you run that calculator for me and share it and during our annual review? I mean, an annual review, a year. I mean, can you imagine a year and a half ago if you'd have told your buddy the world that we would have been living in? You'd have thought, no, that's crazy. That could never happen. And so things are changing so rapidly. You need to be aware of this stuff for yourself rather than just passing it off to your annual review on a portfolio. That's kind of our message. And like you said, yeah, we can give access to the tools and the strategies, but you got to be the tactical person on the ground.
Yeah. I kind of think what we would call the ground force commander, right? I'm sitting back here in the talk.
Yeah, sorry, we're the Pogues.
Yeah, but well, okay. So here, me, I like to do the math on it, right? So let me share some stuff here with you, right? What does that stuff mean when we talk about inflation? Uh, what does that really mean? Okay, well, basically that means the buying power of your dollars is going to erode over time, right? Um, so you can see here, okay, hey, I got $50,000 for the year that I'm starting with. Um, a lot of those calculators, when you put that stuff in, you'll say, well, okay, I need $50,000 to fund my retirement. Well, the problem with that is you don't need $50,000 every year. You need $50,000 in this year. The next year, you're going to need a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until you get down here. You're 20 years into your retirement. You need almost $80,000 to have the same buying power as that $50,000 did 20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing this calculation and saying, well, I just need $50,000 a year for the rest of my life, guess what? 20 years into your retirement, that $50,000 is going to have the same buying power as $31,000 does today. So, that's that piece of it. And then the other piece is, okay, what does inflation really do to my investments? So actually, I shouldn't have stopped sharing my screen yet. We have some more slides in here too, right? So we've got we go down here to hold on a second.
Looks like math.
It is, but I
That's
can't.
scary.
Here, let me stop sharing here. All right, I got to figure out what the deal is with this. Let me get my. There we go. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the inflation effects. Like, okay, how do you figure out what my return is after inflation? This is just a math formula I put up there to make you think that I'm really smart, but I know how to use it, right? Okay, so what does that mean? What is your return after inflation? If my growth rate is 8%, that's what X is, right? And my rate of inflation, that should be 2.5%.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Um, what is my actual return after you take inflation into account? It's actually 5.37% if you use that formula. So that means your real return. That's why I hate when I hear these people say, oh, you can get 10, 12%. I'm like, are you? Not necessarily, right? This is what you're actually getting. And we're not even talking about fees or taxes. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But okay, well, we just dumped, we talked about it before. We just dumped a ton of money into the supply. Well, what's going to happen? Let's say that doubles inflation, right? Now I'm getting this 8% return that I'm like, oh, okay, that looks awesome. Well, when your inflation doubles, guess what? Your return basically gets cut in half. So that's kind of the math behind it. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to understand that. Like, don't get into this false sense of security thinking, well, I've been getting 7 or 8% every year. Yeah, you are, but there's some things that are eating away at those returns, especially when you combine them with the other things that are eating away at your returns too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the big thing, you and I were talking about all these articles, right? Current events right now. That is essentially, if you're familiar with the concepts of supply and demand and the effect that they have on price or value, right? Supply has an inverse relationship with value or price, right? So the more supply you have, the less something is worth or the less it will cost.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Scarcity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the opposite of scarcity.
Yeah. Right. So the less of something you have, well, think about it, right? Why is a Ferrari, start
Mm-hmm.
at $250,000? Well, because they only make so many every year. Right. But I think, well, obviously there's some other reasons that go into that too, but realistically, like they keep the supply low in order to keep the price high. Well, and then there's the other aspect of that, demand. Demand has more of a direct relationship to the price or value, right? If the demand for something goes up, obviously the price is going to go up,
Mm-hmm.
right? If the demand for something goes down, the price is going to go down. Look at, I mean, like
Baseball
shopping
cards.
malls. Yeah, baseball cards.
Baseball cards were, I mean, the rarest of the rare things, were worth so much money. And then one day people stopped caring.
Yeah,
And because I had baseball cards when I was a kid, I was like, I'm gonna make so much money. I saved them for years and years and years. And finally, my mom was like, "Can I get rid of these baseball cards?" She took them to an expert, and he was like, "Yeah, these aren't worth anything." I was like,
yeah,
because nobody cares anymore. For some reason,
yeah.
there's too many baseball card companies, and then people stopped. Once social media and stuff came on, what's the point of going to baseball card shows? And so that was a big one for me. I remember from my childhood, just seeing the effect of you know the supply versus demand in that.
I was going to use the example of shopping malls because you think
Sure.
like back in the 80s, right? Shopping malls. Oh man, dude, those things were, yeah, those were a solid investment, right? Getting into that sort of commercial real estate. But, look at it now. You go to downtown Norfolk to MacArthur Center. Like when I moved here, that thing, it was at 1999. The mall had just opened. It was like the crown jewel of downtown Norfolk.
Oh,
They
okay.
had all these big stores in there and stuff now. And now, as the demand for in person retail is going away, go
Crickets.
down to MacArthur Center today, and probably at least a third of the stores are empty. So why is that important? Well, like you just said, over the last year or so, we have increased the supply of money. And obviously, now that the supply is there, the value of that money is essentially going down, right? Demand has, I guess demand has also kind of gone up for certain things, which has driven the price up. But I mean, look at, the plywood, lumber, that's a big one.
Hmm.
Look at gas, right? There was that story about after the colonial thing. These are macro events, right? Um, the Columbia pipeline or Colonial pipeline, whatever it was, they got hacked. Oh my God, dude. Down here in Virginia Beach,
Hmm.
not a single gas station in Virginia Beach had gas for, what was it, like 2 days or? Because I remember I was in the gym working out in the morning and I saw on the TVs they were like, oh, gas shortage, blah 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 blah. So I filled up with gas the day before. I was fine, but I told my wife, I was like, you might want to go gas your car up right now if you don't have any. We both work from home, so we don't really drive that far anyways. But
Right.
I was like, I'm pretty sure every place is going to run out of gas. And sure enough, that later that day, she waited like 4 or 5 hours, couldn't find a
Whoa.
gas station.
That's because, did you see the videos of people filling up garbage bags with
Yeah,
gas to try to hoard
garbage
it?
bags. That I was like, oh my God, what is wrong? But here's the bad part: is it doesn't surprise me after seeing what happened with toilet paper and COVID.
Well, yeah, and
Um,
this just shows the general ignorance of this. 'Cause let's be honest, this is basic level stuff, economics 101, and just the lack of people paying attention. I mean, we're trying to say, hey, you don't have to get caught up in that world. You can prepare yourself, to avoid it. But yeah.
yeah. Well, I think the other piece too is that's a very emotional thing, right? People don't want to get caught without, people that were probably like, oh, I don't have any toilet paper now.
Hmm.
That it's sensationalism. The news doesn't make it any better. I mean, that's how I found out about it. That's why I saw it was on every news station. And I told my wife, you should probably go get some gas today because it was all over the news and people are going to freak out and there's not going to be any. And I didn't expect it to go that far to where people were putting gas in trash bags. And I just, did you ever see that meme where you see something so stupid and somebody like starts to dial on their phone and it says Thanos on the caller ID,
Oh,
right?
okay.
That's what that made me think of. I was like, oh my God, people are just being completely irrational and kind of selfish too. I mean, really, she was fine. Like, she didn't really need the gas. She had like a quarter tank, and I think at most we might drive 5 or 6 miles a day. Um, and then a few days later, everything was restored. Same thing
Right.
with the meat plant, right? It's again, those people have those overly emotional reactions to these things. There's no rationality involved in it. They just say, well, I got to make sure I get mine. But yeah, so that's the base point is, look, we've dumped a whole bunch of money into the economy. The supply has significantly increased. Expect the value to go down, which means prices are going to go. It's going to take more dollars to buy something, right?
Yeah, let me show just real quick. Whoops. Can you see this?
Yeah,
Just I just pulled this down real quick. It's not the best graph. There's better ones out there, especially if you're following any of this stuff on Twitter. But just to quickly show, I mean, the COVID. This is just the COVID response. I mean, look how much money we just put in just a short period of time. The only time got close to that was in 2008, and this is. I think the chart stopped. It goes way above that. Not to mention
yeah.
what's coming, and of course that affects interest rates. There's less demand for money, and so they need to lower the rates to get it flowing out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So I want to show that one also. Might as well show this one while we have it up, just to visually see the value of $1 bill. And of course, this has a lot to do with increasing the money supply. You got to understand how the Federal Reserve Act started the new fractional reserve banking system, which allows banks to kind of just create money on their own, let alone whenever we pump money into the economy. Either way, it's been decreasing the value. And there's an argument that this has been done intentionally. It didn't have to be this way. Before all this stuff happened, inflation stayed relatively normal. Like, there's no requirement for inflation to exist. And we're not going to change that, obviously, on this podcast. But to be aware, this is happening, and frankly, most people are just unaware that there's been manipulation and things that cause this. They think it's just part of the system, and I don't think that level of misinformation is helpful. I don't know what you necessarily do about it other than just being aware. I mean, the more aware you are of how we got to here, like how is this possible? And when you first time you see it, I remember the first time I saw it and I was just like, whoa, really? Like,
Hmm.
we talk about this in a 10-20 year time frame, but the fact that our dollar bill is literally 1% valued at about 1% of what it was 100 years ago, something's wrong
Yeah.
there.
Well, so that kind of brings us to the full circle. How do we protect against that, right? Obviously, you need to uh, outpace inflation in order to beat it. If you don't, you're going to fall behind, right? You're the old adage of just stuffing your money in a mattress, or putting it in a safe instead of putting it somewhere where it's going to work for you harder than inflation will. That you could do that if you want. It's going to be, theoretically, it would be secure, right? The physical, okay, well, my money's here, it's fine. Well, yeah, but over time, that money's going to be able to buy less and less for you. So the best tactic that you can use in order to protect yourself against inflation and help ensure that you're outpacing it as much as possible is to reduce the effects, or reduce the amount of risk that you're assuming with some of those other traditional investments, right? Mainly market risk, fees, and taxation.
Mhm.
Because, okay, inflation eats away at 2.5% a year, right? Over time, that becomes 10 or 20%. Fees eats away at your assets of 1.5% per year. Over time, that costs you 20 to 30% of your assets. The market, when you subject your assets to market risk versus not subjecting it to market risk. So that means, basically, what I mean by that is having the upside, the ability to participate in the upside without the downside.
Mhm.
Um, that could cost you another 20 to 30%. So you add all those things up together, and you might say, well, the math doesn't add up. It does. If you combine everything together, I can show you, like, yeah, it does add up. I mean, you're looking at costing yourself a significant amount of money with, market risk, fees, taxation. And when I say taxation, I mean not paying taxes at the optimal time. Because, like we said before, you're never going to avoid taxes, or at least legally, you're not going to avoid taxes. It's just figuring out what's the best time to pay them. When you do that, when you're able to mitigate those risks from those other things, that gives you a better chance at being able to actually outpace inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I'm not going to go into another example with that, but that's really, kind of the secret to success there. It's not really a secret, but that's also, part of the strategy that we use behind the war chest is taking all that stuff into account. This isn't something that we just came up with on a whim. This has
Mm-hmm.
been a lot of time and effort and thought put into this strategy, and building upon the work of others before us, and learning what works and what doesn't. And if you're sitting there listening to a radio talk show host, which you and I are not talk show hosts, we're, if you couldn't tell, but we put in the time and effort into this, in solving this problem. And
Right.
the end result is you have a much better chance now at outpacing the risks that you're subjecting your assets to with that strategy than you would if you just either go out on your own or go to a traditional firm who's really, their goal is, how do I charge as much, fees, sales charges, whatever, as I can, in order to turn as much profit as I can for my shareholders.
Right. And the story that is told around that, hey, you need to pay me because inflation exists and it's a form of a tax. And so the only way to beat inflation is to be invested in the stock market. And so we got to match that with your risk tolerance. And so they tell this whole story and make it sound scary and complicated, saying you need me to beat this inflation. And nobody knows, because quite frankly, most people don't beat inflation because they make mistakes and they end up getting scared, because you have to have the tolerance to be able to handle when the market crashes again. Because how are you beating inflation if you're losing money? So it's really counterintuitive. And of course, nobody's actually thinking about, I'm doing this because I'm beating inflation. No, they're doing it because they want to make money. And so if you're losing money in the process of doing that, even if you haven't cashed out, so technically you haven't lost, you still own the part. We understand that, but when we're getting to bigger amounts of assets, emotions will take control. And so that's why we like the war chest strategy. Hey, we can have that protection from the fear of the downside, but again, we still got to beat inflation, and so we're going to hit on it harder than anybody else will. But we're going to have the fear of missing out on that stock market growth when it is up. If we're just doing a standard, put your money in the mattress type thing to avoid the stock market. So it's been a catch-22 all these years. As you said, we're not the innovators in this space. We're the early adopters, in the fact that we can translate the innovators are the inventors. They're the tech gurus. They're the ones like when someone designs an insurance policy, for example, or a hedge fund strategy. These are analysts. They're in the numbers and stuff. That's not what we do, but they're not good at translating the value of what they do usually to the end user, of course. And so as an early adopter, we're like, it's like, remember the first people who saw Bitcoin, the first people who saw Tesla. Everybody else called them crazy and stuff, and now it's the biggest thing in the world. There were early adopters using Bitcoin. They didn't create it, though. They just figured out, how does it play into our system? How's it going to make things better? Same with Tesla. But there's an argument against that. Batteries take more power than gas. I don't know. It's getting crazy out there. Let alone the Bitcoin thing. You were mentioning the Colonial Pipeline thing earlier. Just to wrap this up on a different topic, but did you see they got the Bitcoin back from the fraudsters?
I did. I
And
saw
they
that they
said,
recovered it.
say how they found it, how they got it. They just
No,
randomly found the wallet chain, which is like not how nobody who could hack the Colonial system um doesn't protect their Bitcoin wallet chain. That's the way the FBI said that they found it. So I
that's
was
what
like,
they
that's
say,
that.
but
Yeah. That's. I mean, it's just funny. It's like something else is definitely going on there. I hope it's not a false flag.
Well,
Um,
I'll tell you this: it's been my experience. Criminals aren't necessarily there's a lot of great things out there where they talk about some of the dumb stuff that criminals do. Criminals, you think about that, committing a crime is there's a lot of operational planning that should go into that
mhm.
and covering your bases, right? Think about any time you would plan an op, the amount of planning that went into one op, even if it was just a patrol. Um, they don't do that really, and I think they probably maybe it was something they didn't notice or didn't catch, or maybe you're right. I just think people make mistakes, especially when it's their first time doing something,
First time
and
hacking
yeah.
a pipeline.
Well, first time doing it for money,
Yeah,
right? Maybe that was they're like, okay, I know I'm not going to
Rant.
make that mistake again, right? So now we can go next time we do this, we know not to do this, right? So it's kind of like Jurassic Park, like the raptors were attacking
Yeah.
the fences and they never attacked the same spot twice. That
It's about the equivalent of a velociraptor in the amount of danger out there. But I mean, honestly, to bring this home, there's an inflation aspect of criminality. We all know that convenience stores and grocery stores, they mark up their prices just a little bit to account for the people that are going to shoplift. So think about that.
yeah, yeah,
Think of
that's a cost
just
to them,
yeah.
right?
So it inflates the cost of it, or what you have to pay for it, what your perceived value is of it. Now, inherently, you don't know this maybe, but your value is, hey, I'm willing to pay that extra price in order to have this here. Otherwise, the store would shut down if everybody was just stealing from them, right? So there's that's part of the trade-off of all this. But no, very 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 powerful discussion and topic. This is like all this stuff. We just implore you to dig in, find find some books like The Creature from Jekyll Island, or some of these other finance books. Obviously, I talk about it a little bit in my book as well, Better Mall Secrets. But yeah, that's all we got for today. Trevor, you won't be with us on Friday. We'll see if we
Now,
can get
get Jared on here to follow up on this
yeah,
discussion.
I already sent him an email. So now hopefully we can set that up. But yeah, man, we'll wish you best rest, a good rest of the week. And we'll talk to everybody later.
Have a good one.